From Bart, collaborative use case focus. Information transformation rather, is a marathon. You go from operational efficiency to working capital / inventory optimization to new business models. Powerful stuff. From Omar, forecasts are linear. The real world is nonlinear. Yeah, no kidding. 10% rejection rates. How can we live with 10% rejection rates? I mean, you can't. So many congratulations, real-time routing and pricing. And Rob, finally, how to aggregate the long tail of capacity. I thought that was noteworthy. Provide upstream and downstream visibility, incorporate facility data. Yes, facility data is highly correlated with pricing. That ought to get CEO's attention. Amazing. So next, what we want to do is move into the discussion and assessment and Q&A part of this workshop. And to kick off the Q&A part, we first want to bring into the discussion two individuals that have what I think are unique perspectives on analysis and insight in supply chain visibility. And let me introduce them and then provide another comment or two. So Jonathan Shaver, at the far end there, he's founder and CEO of Strategic Commerce. He's a Kellogg and a transportation alum, a decade of managing carrier relations before going on to found his own company, Strategic Commerce, which helps e-com and retail brands with design, oversight, and measurement of their shipping networks, if I got that right. His vision includes delivering insight across a product's entire journey from manufacturing to final destination, including returns. And our second speaker is Danesha Marasinghe. He's an industry consulting partner at Teradata, specialized in supply chain, logistics, and procurement business consulting at Teradata, and he believes mightily in the transformative power of data. He's managed the Southeast Asian supply chain practice of Price Waterhouse. He's worked on integrating the global supply chain at Amway and running the supply chain nerve center at Dell. That sounds very cool to me. Okay, so Jonathan and Danesha, given your backgrounds, I'd like to start by asking you how you would advise CEOs and leaders who must think through the visibility ROI, which, it's a worthy goal, but it's actually a substantial technology challenge. It's been a long time coming. And I'm thinking of the sheer complexity of the supply chain visibility. There's a number of variables. There's things like peaking, there's directionality, there's urgency of the shipment, capacity constraints, all that kind of thing. And then there's also the network nature of the business, which means that everything is connected to each other, and what happens in one part of the network affects the other. So I mean, that's the reality. That's the complexity of the situation. And the question that I'd like to ask you is, can you help us how to understand how you think about data and technology in terms of delivering value, and how you distinguish and balance between what I think are two complementary approaches, one of which is the idea of supply chain visibility applications. We can't survive without applications. Applications help us manage our business and manage complexity. They enable some of the unique customer value propositions that are out there. On the other hand, we need supply chain visibility analytics. We can't survive without analytics. Analytics is about answering the questions you've never seen before. And it's the circumstances that are either your newest opportunity or your newest crisis. So Jonathan first, and then Danesha, please take 3 or maximum 4 minutes to talk about what your perspective is on how you reflect on the role of the increasing volumes of data and the increasing capacity of digital technology, and how it is playing out in terms of the value that can be expected and where it should be going in the future.
Okay, well, thank you, Peter, and thank you all for having me today. I'm going to answer it from the perspective of our company. And a little background is, yes, I am a Kellogg grad, and my wife is actually a Northwestern undergrad, so it's at reunion weekend, and she was recruited to be on the reunion committee. So now Kellogg is recruiting me to be on the spring reunion committee. So our company is a little bit unique in that we're a hybrid SaaS and services company, and across the chain where our focal point really is the end delivery. And most of our customers, or a lot of our customers, are high volume e-commerce and retailers. So now is our busy time. And it's what in the industry they call peak. And anybody here likely going to order anything for anybody in the next few weeks, possibly, right? Is there any date when you know you got to have it delivered by? So that's where our specialty is. So it's many transactions. Like there could be millions and millions of transactions that our customers have in this network over a 2 to 3 week period, right? And the criticality of it getting to that individual in this particular case, when they expected it is really important. So we look at it and say, first at a macro level, what's happening from the time that order was placed to when that end consumer, we'll focus on the consumer side here, end consumer expected or was promised to have it delivered. And so anywhere across that chain, there could be some sort of a delay. You could have that you can't process as many orders as you need to in a day. Delay number one, right? You could have that carrier can't induct on time. Southern California, you know the problems, or not maybe you all, we all have probably heard some problems in Long Beach Port at times. But that's also the worst place for a parcel carrier to try to induct volume because you have all the fashion tech companies out there, and many of those are our customers. So if the carrier, even a UPS, can't get in, one of the reasons UPS can't induct as much as they need to is because Amazon has been guaranteed trailers this year because UPS's stock was going down and from an all-time high. So they guaranteed them trailers this year. So now UPS is going to do better because about 30% of UPS's volume is Amazon packages, 11.5% of their revenue. So, so our perspective is, looking at, the shipper on a whole, their outbound network, but then also understanding how it's going to impact the individual end consumer to that level. So anybody here track a package one day, track it again, it's now coming on a different day, and you can't remember whether the day was different, but you think it was, but it doesn't tell you it was different at all. So that happens at a rate of up to 30 to 40% of the time now. And pre-COVID, that was more like 12. And so we know why that happens. We know it's going to happen before it happened. And we can help, somebody do something about that. So connecting it all back to an ROI, in our world, it's how do you, one, make sure that the consumer gets that product when it was promised by that customer, or by that shipper, excuse me. That's like one place. And when you know that is at risk, do something about it early versus later. And I think another thing is, can you do something about it with that asset carrier before, it's great to say, hey, sorry, we're going to miss that scheduled delivery, but it's even better if you can somehow facilitate something to say, hey, here are the ones that you're having problems with in your vast network of many packages. Can you do something about those? And it's surprising that even big carriers like UPS will do that if they know and you have that integrated focus with them. So, back to an ROI, and I think this is important, just point is, in my experience, we weren't working with a lot of CEOs prior to COVID, but it started happening during COVID. And some of them were really big companies. And it's because the cost of the supply chain and the capacity became so constrained that it is one of the most critical issues. So again, back to an ROI, one is, can that customer get what they ordered, right? That's a saved order. That's just step number one. The number of times a carrier tries and just brings it back as an undeliverable package. And then what happens? You either lost an order or you got to reship it again, which by the way, is the whole cost again, right? Because they're not going to wait till you got that one back and then reship it back. So one is that, but then two, you have this, these metrics around AOV and whether or not customer, your average order value and the lifetime value of that customer. And so there's an integrated component. What's happened in the shipping world, and I joke around with my wife, she was a music major here, and she told me all the cool kids here, cool students, we're in theater and music, and I got a chance to meet them. And on the way to the reunion, I said, no, the cool people do shipping. Like, what do you mean? I'm like, don't you want your stuff to come to your house? So I think that, a big part of it is going back to understanding that consumer behavior is very much driven upon shipping now. So are you going to get it when you want to get it? But how much of that matters? Do you really need to get it in 2 days or 4 days? Okay. So there's all this metrics and analytics about whether a consumer will buy based on how fast it will get there and whether it's free, right? And so now, so from our world, we live a lot in the marketing shipping analytics world, saying, how does this drive back to the consumer behavior? And then also just cutting down phone calls, can you be more electronic? So that's how we see it from an ROI perspective.
Thank you. Over to you, Danesha.
Well, that was very insightful. Well, I thought it was. So I come at it from a slightly different angle because at Teradata, I deal with the consumer side of this, and I also deal with the manufacturing side of this. And when you're looking at your supply chain and you're wondering where the value is, it depends on the type of problem you're trying to solve. On a manufacturer side, they are usually looking at their margins vis-a-vis inbound supply chain. So I used to run a value chain, and in a value chain, what I'm looking at is total costs. I can very easily sort of reduce my inventory or rationalize my shipping costs, but I can do that to the detriment of something else. So the value comes when you connect these different data points and these different processes to understand what is the overall efficiency that I can get out of that supply chain. And then when you connect it to the shifts that are happening in industry right now, a lot of companies like L'Oreal and a few of the other consumer brands are going direct to consumer. So then they have all the problems that you were just describing, in addition to the kind of problems or challenges they have on the manufacturing side. So there again, the ability to synthesize this data, generate some insights, and create opportunities for efficient decisions is a big deal. And doing this at scale is a competitive advantage. So if you can do it better, you will probably thrive in these volatile conditions. If you are not so good, you'll probably find it quite challenging. So when we say find value, first thing is figure out what the use case is, understand how it connects to the rest of your business, and then contextualize it, and then go and attack it. Make sure you have a strategy around your data and your applications, because you can't live without the applications. You're going to need them to do the things you need to do in your specific functions, but you need to be able to get that data and connect it to the rest of your organization. That's kind of how I see it.
Okay, thank you. So you've heard a lot of comments and insightful high energy ideas. Let me see if there's anyone in the audience who wants to start off and be the first one to ask a question. Who's out there? No one yet. Okay, all right, there's one.
Jonathan, we're seeing a trend where people are looking at not only how fast to get there and the cost, but what is the sustainability impact? If I ship it this way, there's going to be less emissions. Are you seeing that?
I probably don't need the mic, probably hear me. Yeah, and I think what's really tricky about that is it's in the parcel world, you don't know what's an electric vehicle and not an electric vehicle. And so you can, we can track miles, right? So we have a pretty good idea of tracking miles, but I think how you're able to identify that into sustainability, I think is still really complicated. I think what a lot of companies do is they then take the carrier sustainability program and like use it as an average versus actual. But I do think it's a big deal, especially with fuel pricing, right? And with fuel. So I think a better understanding of what carriers are using, what type of vehicles for delivery, I think is crucial to be able to capture those metrics better, in my opinion.
Yeah, I have a perspective on that as well. If you actually look at it in the US, I would fully agree. Europe, we see a lot more utilization of electric fleets, or a lot of last mile delivery, even with bikes. And so we see companies there when they go and route the solutions, where based on the preference of the customer, they can actually decide, is this going to go on a regular van, electric van? Is it going to be on a smaller electric vehicle? Or is it going to go on a bike? Or you have places like London where they have low emission zones, where it's in the best interest, not of the consumer, but actually of the retailer to do that as at lower cost as possible. So there are a lot of companies to avoid that low emission zones and the taxes they have to pay by driving into London with a regular combustion engine, or trying to do that differently. And actually, some of the companies that tried to do that, they actually found out that they were a lot quicker to deliver the product to the consumer, because all these vans are just sitting in traffic. I don't know if some of you have been to London the last few years, but when you have to go from one side of town to the other, it could be an hour and a half. So much better off if you can, as a visitor, to use the subway. But Yeah, so I think we don't see a lot of that in North America, but there's a lot of places in the US and in the world where we are seeing it that are a lot further ahead in sustainability. And that's starting to be built in, for example, in the routing systems where a consumer can indicate, besides picking a specific delivery time and a cost of that delivery, also the sustainability impact that actually gets calculated in the carbon footprint of that. And especially, I would say, younger generation are looking into that, and they will pick a lower carbon footprint if you make that data transparent to them. So in the US, we see Amazon, who basically says you have that one day where we consolidate everything and drop it at your door. That doesn't show you what the carbon impact of that is. So there is a way that you can actually use data to change the behavior of the consumer.
Okay, who's next? Right over there.
Tom Sanderson with Boeing. All the presentations, from my point of view, as someone who makes the vehicle, there's already too many platforms, and they already talk to like too many other platforms. And for us, for air transport, regional doesn't help. Like if you don't have an international solution, you got nothing. Where are we at, and who sort of owns a global multimodal platform hub connector? I don't care what you call it, so that we can all talk to each other at some point without 16 layers of translation.
I'll let Fab answer first, but we're both fully global and multimodal, but I'll let Fab go.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And as Bart said, you know, that's, you know, from our capability perspective, that is, you know, that's a constant expansion of capability. By the way, not trivial, as I mentioned before, right? You know, we have a lot of assumptions in North America and you know, certain level of maturity that allows, you know, the adoption and driving of technology gains. But when you get in other parts of the world, there's less maturity, a lot more disparity. And so that is definitely a challenge. The one thing though, that I will comment on, and I tried to allude to this in my talk, and certainly something that I've referenced in different talks, is it's okay to have multiple, I don't know if platform is the right word, but you know, again, I use our phone ecosystems as a great example. There are fundamental platforms that act as a you know, whether you're Android or your iOS. But the cool thing about our experiences is that all of these capabilities that are now available are interchangeable, and you can drive use cases across, in a lot of cases, competing applications. I mean, I use the use case that I talked about where, you know, I have 4 or 5 apps that I use when I train, and quite honestly, there's overlapping capability across most of them. And I get to pick and choose, you know, which things I use that drive my personal use case. So when you have a marketplace of innovation, it's okay if there's overlap. In fact, that's now become the standard. And what you're going to see more and more in the enterprise world of technology is more and more of this co-opetition, because everything is gray. And that's why you hear a lot of, you know, I know we talk about it, and my peers at FourKites or at P44 talk about it as well. You talk a lot about integration and APIs and openness. That the enterprise industry has been slow compared to the consumer side, but that's absolutely where it is going. I don't know if you want to add more color there.
Yeah, and I think that's been an evolution the last 3 years. And I would say if you look like 3 years ago, most people would buy visibility different. They would buy it for a single mode. They would buy it for a single region. And then we've seen that really change where people said, no, hold on. We want this visibility on a global scale, want it for all modes in a single system. And that's why the leading companies have done acquisitions where we acquired, instead of saying it's going to take us 3 to 5 years to build all of that deep capability in ocean or last mile. We just went and bought the leaders in that space and then put it all together. The other thing that's also important to understand is that we still mainly play in that part, which is inventory and movement. So everything that gets affected in movement, whether it's on the road or in the yard or going into the warehouse. But then there's companies that obviously look at visibility in a much larger scale. So companies like Boeing. And so they probably already have some kind of a control tower, which is either internally built or it's a vendor that they use. In that particular case, you don't necessarily use a FourKites or P44 as the platform, but you still use us. And it's, in that case, it's data as a service. You still need all the transportation data. You just pump all the data in together with all the other data. So the core of these solutions isn't what you necessarily see as the end result, something on the screen within that platform. It's really the underlying network and the data it provides. That's the core. Then you decide, well, if I'm just doing transportation and I don't have these systems, probably use the platform, but I might need to look at it from a bigger perspective where I have multiple sources, because you know how segmented supply chain is. Logistics is segmented, let alone the whole supply chain. So there isn't a single company out there that can provide you all the data. But guess what? We all work together. Like when we talk about collaboration, we as technology vendors also collaborate with all these other systems, right? The Blue Yonders and the Oracles and the SAPs, so that together we can make a solution, a platform that allows you as the end user to more easily use a solution and then make that more consumable.
I found it very interesting that several of the speakers used the term use cases. It strikes me that the term use case is associated with business value. I mean, that's, you're looking for a particular outcome. And so the question that I have for the panel, anybody who wants to suggest it, is there something about platforms that has enabled us to adopt this use case language? Or was there a use case focus that drove the creation of the platforms? What's driving what? Start. Because there's nothing more important than business value. And whether it's taking a use case that's small and using it to grow, like from efficiency to working capital improvement to business model transformation, that's a fantastic journey. How do you institutionalize that kind of thing? And
So I'll just, because boy, that was a big question. And there's so many things to comment on there. So maybe I'll start and everyone can chime in. But you know, from my point of view, going back to this, you know, whole app ecosystem perspective, you know, coming out of the supply chain execution space, if you think about how things were operated, I spoke about this earlier today, you know, you would have a transportation solution, you would have a warehouse solution. Both are considered supply chain execution, but you know, as I came up through my career, those were two very different things and they did not talk to one another. And I don't mean just from a technology perspective, I mean inside the organization. They had different objectives, they had different measurements. And here's a good example where, you know, that's the way organizations operated and that was okay for a while. But as things evolve, as capabilities become more available as consumers, and one of the things we, you know, I want to make sure we call out, you mentioned it when you start talking about consumer decisions, probably the biggest disruption, forget COVID and all the things happening, the biggest disruption over the past decade is consumer centricity. Think about that. How we consume has changed the behavior and the way we look at supply chain movement. And so when you focus on a particular, you know, consumer satisfaction, now I've got to break the barriers that enable that, which means I have to get, in that case, my TMS and WMS and those operators to view on a bigger goal, not just their individual goals. And that's enabled both by technology, or as Bart pointed out earlier, also talent, process for all of you in here, right? So, you know, I think that it's a combination of innovation and capability that's evolved, but also requirement because of all the you know, the business disruption that's happened. I don't know who wants to take that next.
Yeah, I work a lot with large trucking companies in the US who in the past have used a platform or a solution as their TMS that would be super rigid. It would solve for one use case. I want to operate a trucking company. Here's your software that will allow you to do that. And more over the last 2, 3, 4 years, I'm starting to notice that those companies are moving their operations into the cloud, and their expectation is that there's a configurable UI that you can adjust to match your exact business need. And more that's becoming the kind of status quo or the table stakes to offer a new solution. So I'm just noticing that configurable software for specific use cases is just emerging as the new norm, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I fully agree with Bob. So most of the application stacks that have been created the last 30 years were specific to a use case. So a TMS was built to do something specific. A warehouse management system was specifically built to do something. These platforms are completely different. It's completely different architecture, but what we're doing is actually connecting and then creating the data. What you can do with the data is limitless. And we're only at the start of it. And I think that's why Fab and I, after a career of whatever, we won't say that word again because we'll seem too old, decide to go on visibility because there's so much you can do with it. But what's needed is really to listen to the customer, say, what is it you're trying to achieve? And it's not in the sense of, oh, we're going to customize something for you. It's really to understand what are you trying to, as key priority, trying to obtain. Are you trying to drive better customer service? Are you looking at cost efficiency? Are you looking at operational efficiency? What is it you're trying to do? And based on that, we're applying the platform and the solution so they can achieve that. So it's a completely different type of beast from your traditional applications. But again, we're trying to understand which needs to solve, but it's also, you don't want to go out and say, well, data can solve all this great stuff, but that people are not asking for. And one practical example is, so I mentioned Amazon, right? So Amazon, we're working with them in Europe as well. And they're saying, hey, you're already connecting to all of our carrier network. We're actually interested in capturing carbon emissions. So is there a way that you can provide that to us? We go like, well, we already have APIs with all these carriers. All we need to do is add another field to the API. And we're actually also pulling the real-time consumption, fuel consumption from the ECM, from the engine computer module, and pulling that in and passing that on to Amazon. So now with the same use case really, or with the same connection, I should say, they now have a completely different use case. Instead of just tracking where the product is and where it's going, to now also understanding sustainability. But again, you have to understand what is the need and how do you then translate that into what the data can provide.
Most customers say all of the above.
No, there's no way they can handle all that. Yeah.
Or do you want to save money or more efficient? Wouldn't most of your clients say yes, all of the above?
Well, I think, well, if that would be the case, I would say you have a confused customer, right? Because you have to put a scope in place, because as technology vendors, there's nothing worse than people say, we want it all. Yeah, but what's the priority? No, we want it all and we want it day one. That you're never going to be successful in doing that. And by the way, if you didn't hear what we said earlier about all these disruptions, who actually has time to do all this stuff, right? Because people are like, you know, extinguishing fires everywhere all the time. So they say, you know, what people are doing, especially now in the current economic situation where people are really focused on cash flow, it's like, you need to do something for me that's simple to start with, that you can implement immediately and immediately create value. Not a project that takes 12 months just to figure out what it is we're going to do, scope it out, and then implement. And it'll require a lot of resources from me. So that's quite different as well in the approach. It's start simple. And also, like I said before, with data, it's not just the machine learning part, it's the human learning part of it as well. People in the beginning, when they use these solutions, they really have no clue what to then do once they've collected all the data. So we have to partner with them to make them understand where are the nuggets of gold coming from for your organization where you can drive change. So it's an ongoing process. And like I said, right, it's a marathon. So don't be in a rush to try and solve that all at once, because that's kind of a disaster written all over it.
I do think, Heine, the answer to your question is there's a difference between an application mentality and an analytics mentality. In the past, we really knew how to build applications. TMS and WMS are great examples. And people said, if you're going to automate a process, you should automate it for my department, then you do that. And the net result is you end up with all these silos. With the benefits of platforms, you now have the ability to integrate data from across those environments, and you can begin to zero in on something you can do very quickly, which you can't generally do with applications. Applications take a long time to build because you're trying to make a process more efficient. But analytics, the smaller your use case and the more precise it is, the greater the chance you'll be able to do it and do it quickly. And then you'll get on this marathon journey that Bart was talking about, which is going from an initial very small efficiency use case potentially to a much larger inventory, working capital management use case, and then to a larger, eventually, business model transformation. I was going to ask you, Omar, there were several use cases that seemed to be popping up at the very end of your presentation, different ways that you were seeing to utilize the skills that you had as an organization to find value for your customers. So do you want to comment on use cases and how that relates to your business?
So, yeah, I guess for me, again, I'll repeat, I'm not a technology company. We're primarily, I mean, we have, tech forward, you would say, but we're still a service company. We're a brokerage. And so maybe speaking, a combination to, the Boeing comment and the platform comments is, our TMS that we use is, they can't keep up with the rate of change, right? So, I mean, we certainly have contemplated, trying to find a solution that is already more robust. And I think some are out there, but changing is also difficult. So I think, probably the biggest thing that we've done is purchased their API module, which was sort of their way of saying, look, we give up, we can't keep up. If if you can do it
Just
on your
do
own,
the pieces you can.
yeah. If you can do it on your own, go ahead and do it. And that's, I mean, at once it's frustrating, but it's exciting because it's allowing us to build integrations with weather optics. It's allowing us to build integrations, with digital booking providers. It's allowing us to build our own pricing technology and bring it back into our TMS. And so I guess all of that is sort of, it's all the frontier for us to be able to say, okay, we're not going to have our own TMS, but we're going to have our own ability to modify it to how our landscape is changing, because our company's evolving in ways that other brokerages aren't. Maybe they don't need that. But we do. So that helps answer.
Questions from the audience? Okay, please.
So this question is kind of inspired by the last Uber Freight slide about the touchless load. Almost every note on that chart said automatically. And so I'm kind of wondering how autonomous trucks and autonomous systems kind of fall into that ecosystem. Is that something that's actually on your radar? Is that something you're preparing for? Do you see a real use case for that?
All right. Yeah, I think our network is incredibly complementary to self-driving trucks in the future. I think we're at Uber Freight right now very focused on designing a process that will allow for automation from planning all the way through execution and payment. And we think of self-driving trucks at some point out in the future. We've done public partnerships with, I believe, Aurora and Waymo. But no, I'm not sure that we're really thinking about how do we add value for shipper partners and carrier partners at the moment. And then as those self-driving partnerships move along, I think we'll pursue those.
I think when I had my Art of the Possible slide, I think it was at the Transportation Center when I presented here 2 months ago. I had that slide when you automated that, but on top of what like an Uber would provide, you would have an autonomous truck in there where when you dispatch, you would actually call that as a service. So again, you would have in the future, it could be 10, 20, 30 years from now, right? Where all of that potentially could be automated. It's going to take a long time to put all those things together. But again, what's important to understand is you need the data underneath it because that's what's linking it. So you need data and connectivity. Now the systems will be able to handle it. But the fact is, will all those companies talk to each other? And we see a lot of collaboration like Bob just discussed. But the other part as well is, can people handle that change, right? Because I think even last year, I think it was another digital freight platform that did that first fully automated connection where they planned it and then send it to an autonomous truck. Unfortunately, that company is now out of business. But the fact is, do people in a transportation organization, are they okay with letting go of control and changing their processes? I sometimes talk to companies that, hey, we can automate a process completely. And they say, we propose it to the customer, said, no. We still need to have a person that controls that process and pushes the button, although we can automate it. And so they had that person control it. And then afterwards they go, whoa, something went wrong because 20% of all these transactions had an issue with it. And they went back and analyzed it. And the 20% where they had the issue was where the human intervened and overrode the decision of the computer. And so it shows you that it's not just about technological capability. It's also about organizational readiness. And that comes to the point that I made before. You need to have digital talent. You need to have young people like yourself who come and understand that technology mindset rather than having older people that have been in the industry for a long time, so used to doing things the same way. And they go like, no, we would never be able to automate that.
I want to thank you for the question. And I want, Rob, if I could pivot off of her question and come back to you on the touchless shipment. When I first heard the concept, I don't think I could grasp the magnitude of changes that were required just within the context of what you put up on the screen. And I'm just wondering if you should walk through what you mean by a touchless shipment, so everyone is really clear on what that is, because I think there's a lot under the covers there.
Yeah, I could probably even incorporate some of these guys' businesses into the life cycle of a touchless load at Uber Freight, but a shipper will be in their TMS, and at the moment an order becomes ready, they will call our API, receive a price. Let's say it's $400. This is the not so dreamy short-term James Bond scenario that we can actually do today. It's just not the number one way we execute an order fully autonomous. But yeah, a shipper could call our API. We can provide them a price. A tender will be sent to Uber Freight, for example. We'll receive the tender. Then there's like platforms that enable us to like schedule an appointment based on some logic. So we'll say, if the transit time is X, then schedule an appointment for this time and this time at the warehouse. If the shipper or customer has warehousing companies that are online, we can do that. Then the load is presented on our platform as an available load for any trucker or any carrier. In this case, if it were to be touchless, that load would then be tendered based on a set of logic that would say something like, lane XYZ goes to this carrier at this price as primary, and they would receive the tender. Then they would dispatch their driver. This would be on their own platform. Just for fun, let's say this driver doesn't use our app. They're a P44 enabled carrier. We would call P44's tracking API, which would not require like a human touch point. We would track the load all the way to delivery. Even if something happens in transit, we could address that. But yeah, then the driver will break a geofence at the final destination, deliver the freight, and then they will send us their BOL and receive payment in 2 days. And it's seamless. Again, it's not the majority of loads that are that automated, but it's exciting to see that that's possible. And as we build more and more and more and build more momentum, we'll see more and more of those types of loads.
What percentage of loads could be facilitated by that kind of process in the near future? 10, 15%?
I think more than that. Yeah. I'd say 20, 25%. Depends on the shipper, it depends on the commodity type, and it depends on the tech savviness of the parties involved.
So I'll give a perfect analogy of that. I was actually in the airline business in 1995 when somebody said, you know what, we should eliminate paper tickets and do electronic tickets. And people said, oh my God, that will never work. Well, the most we can do is 25% of our tickets could be electronic. And then now we'll have two systems. We'll have an electronic system and a paper system. Who wants that? We have twice the cost. Well, of course, that's not the way it went. We did implement electronic ticketing, and it did eventually become the norm. And it did result in a number of other process changes. Anyway, so very powerful concept. Thank you for.
Yeah, just one more comment to make you dream even more, right? Because when you start introducing autonomous trucks, and if they're truly autonomous, they're driverless, they don't have to go back to a home base. So it'd be similar to what Uber does today. When you ask for a car, not all those cars are actually coming to you based on your order. If they see a spike in demand because there's a concert somewhere or there's something happening, it already knows demands. It's already sending drivers to that location before you even ordered it. So you could see similar things happening in freight. Instead of that driver having to go to the home base and then maybe go and empty towards you to load, it already knew there's a spike in Gatorade because of the weather. So I'm already going to send trucks to the Gatorade's facility because I know the demand's going to be there. So those are things that we're obviously not doing today that are all going to be possible. And again, because we'll have the data, we can automate the rest of the process.
Peter? Yeah.
Please.
So one thing that's really interesting that comes out of the presentation, obviously you have it's that line between competition versus collaboration, essentially. Because, you look at the Uber model, that makes perfect sense. You have your data from your customers, et cetera. Have that cloud is all integrated across your systems and but that's your data. Where does then the more sort of market data come in? The data that is, what is the incentive potentially for sharing some of that information that is then going into, Omar's system where you have rates from different sources, et cetera. And what trends do you see in that regard versus kind of keeping one's own data, integrating versus beginning to get more sharing across platforms to enable collaboration? It's open.
I'll make one comment on that. The one thing that people have to be incredibly cautious of in collaboration is confidentiality. And I think that it's sort of the thing people don't talk about, but if you deal with we deal with what's now considered private consumer information. So our security expectations are incredibly more now than they were 4 years ago, right? So I don't have a great comment about how to do it. I'm saying that one of the inhibitors is how you manage confidentiality of partners, whoever that partner happens to be in that piece. And I'm going to turn over to the rest of the group to comment.
Yeah, for this one, I'll tap into a little bit of my history rather than the current environment. But when I was working in the supply chain execution space, particularly in the TMS space, one of the things that we innovated around was the notion of openness and thinking beyond just our for-purpose existence. And part of that, again, we're overusing this word use case, but it's good because what our customers were asking us for sets of capabilities or wanted us to solve certain problems. And we were faced with this decision on, do we start building all of these things ourselves and, making these, what essentially was a bigger and bigger mousetrap, which then has its own cost and support issues around it? Or do we start tapping with the innovation that was happening, which obviously was, as we all know, continues to accelerate at an incredible rate. And so our strategy was, let's make ourselves as open as possible. And, that way, we still make money and have a viable business, but we can present a greater value to a customer because we solve a bigger problem by bringing things together. And again, I keep going back to the consumer model, but that's what you deal with every day on your phone, right? You think about even just the macro platforms that interact, right? You buy from Amazon, probably via your Google browser on your iPhone. Right? These are three incredible competitors to one another, and yet they all interact. And so, there's a viable business model for people to be able to deliver their core capabilities and have overlap and have a viable business through connectivity, because you're just solving a much broader problem or set of problems.
Concern with the supply chain topics, of course, that we're discussing.
Right.
Danesha, let me ask you this further to Hani's question about the data from outside the company. The question is, it seems like more and more of the data that a company needs to depend on is outside of its four walls. And so what perspective does Teradata have in terms of how to get value and how to create value given that situation?
I think it starts with governance. So you have to have a very good governance model around what is it that you're sourcing from the outside, who's using it, and where does it ultimately reside, and how do you persist it? So that's one. Once you sorted that out, you then have to figure out what specific use cases are permissible. So we deal with medical data in the supply chain. So when you're dealing with that kind of stuff, there's a lot of things you can do, but there's probably a lot of things that you shouldn't do. And then you have to have, so it's around managing that, defining that, and setting those expectations with the partners involved. Is there a space to create value here? Yes, there is. Because what you're doing is you're fostering consumption, and we live in this consumption-based sort of cloud-based environments. So the more connected you are, the more data you get, the more data you can handle securely, the bigger the use cases and the bigger the value proposition around that. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's kind of how we approach it.
One more follow-on question from Brett on this topic.
I mean, to follow up on his question, unless somebody had a specific, I think Bart has been wanting to.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll let Bart go, but then I was gonna ask Omar. If you could talk about the open visibility network, unless Bart, you're gonna talk about that. Because I think that gets directly to his question, and tell us what that is and kind of what the vision of that is, but.
Yeah, at a good industry example, right? And it's really about, you know, a lot of the analysts will say that it's people need to change their mantra from not sharing data to sharing data. And there is a platform out there. It's called the Skywise platform. It's one of Boeing's competitors, where all the people that were buying these planes, and most of them are competitors because they compete as airlines on the same routes. But when they all got together and put all of their maintenance information in one platform, they found out that the performance of these companies was far greater based on that data if they were doing it themselves. And sometimes people understand that the data that you own actually gets more value to someone else than yourself. Obviously, you don't want to share confidential information. So there's a lot of value, and it's proven that, you know, chief data officers who do share data are a lot better performing than those companies that don't. The other part is purely from a technology perspective. The more data you feed to like machine learning and allow algorithms and data science to work on it, exponentially the value and the accuracy of your insights goes up. And so a lot of companies say, well, just give me my data and I'll do it in my own network or in my own technology. But if you're doing that for $1 billion worth of freight, or you go on a platform that's $100 billion of freight, even with the exact same tool, the outcome will be a lot more exact and insightful if you are allowing more data around it. And so I think that's where companies are starting to see that. The other part is, and that's something people always have said, is like if a company just uses their own data, and for example, when it comes specific to transportation, going, my ETA is 92%. And we're happy because last year was 98%. Was 92% good? If you can't benchmark that against the industry. So that's where the other value comes from data sharing, being able to have more data, is that you don't necessarily need to provide the details underneath it, but platforms anomalize the data and allow you to actually position yourself and really understand where is it that I'm different, better or worse than the industry. And it gives you a lot of immediate insights of where you have opportunities to improve.
So I think there are a couple of things that we're talking about, right? One is collaboration. And I think I would say kind of just look at this group of panelists, right? We technically have two visibility competitors. Technically, you might not think so, but two brokerage competitors. And we're here, you know, trying to kind of help everybody be better and learn more. And from a personal standpoint, like I'm on the board of directors of TIA, and that's really just a community of competitors trying to help each other do better. So, you know, fundamentally, I'm a believer in collaboration and sharing and excuse me, and just trying to lift each other up, you know, even competitors. I think it's a big enough space. I apologize. With respect to Open Visibility Network, I think that mindset is the same. And it's a group of, yeah, I don't know what happened. Yeah, I think it's not. I don't think it's I apologize. So Open Visibility Network is many of us who are providing real-time data and real-time rates and real-time visibility are sort of committing to collaborating with each other to a destination that's not really known yet. But I think that what they're doing with the network is trying to find out, you know, kind of who's willing to participate and what are we going to do with the information. And it takes that spirit of collaboration, which kind of us starting with this panel, right, of us joining forces to try to lift each other up and lift your experience up in this room. I mean, they're talking about maybe having a public-private partnership. I mean, there's certainly always kind kind of humanitarian parts, to having data, whether it's collaborating, with FEMA, if there's disasters, and there's also, kind of the for-profit part, but I think we don't really know the destination, where we're going with the network, but I am just a member. I've agreed to be a member, and I've agreed to share, our rates and our data and somewhat our strategies, and there are going to be competitors in there. I know that, and that's fine, because again, there's a certain amount of competition, but we also have different business models. So, my price might work for me, whereas your price might work for you and not for me, and vice versa. But so I think it's just members who are open to that spirit of collaboration to see, kind of where it ends, if that helps. I mean, I think I'm very early stages of membership, and they're very early stages of figuring out what they want to do.
How many members are there currently though? And I mean, I think FourKites and Project 44 are both members
Yep.
right now.
Yeah, we were the founding members together with Tide.
Yeah,
Okay.
a dozen, maybe. Yeah.
So that's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think so.
Back there, Justin.
Peter, this is going to sound very cynical, and I don't mean it that way, but I'm really very curious. I can't tell you how many events I've been to like this. The words that keep coming from the front are collaborative, integrated, partners, adaptable, flexible, automate, I mean, on and on and on. You begin to blur. As you think about that future state, where's the differentiation going to come from? Where's the differentiation between a broker that's going down this path that all of you have articulated, and I believe, and so forth? Is it going to be in the analytics? Is it going to be a secret sauce that somebody's figured out, like an Uber? Is it going to be in a niche that somebody's working in, and so forth? How all these companies that come here sound alike. You sound like you're on the same journey. You're saying the right things, and I believe it. I've seen it work, but at the end of the day, if you're from a strategy standpoint, how are you going to differentiate? How is one broker going to be different from another broker? How's one analytics company going to be different from another?
Should brokers answer this one? I mean, I would start just sort of very simple, because, I think right now there are 23,000 brokerages in the country, but I mean, I hate to be too simple, but I think sometimes I think of it as like a car, right? I mean, there's a chance that all of us need a car, right? But there's a chance that everybody in this room has a different one, right? And so different brokerages will do different things and provide, I think, different value, and strategically position their kind of the value of their relationship with their customers, in different ways. And so often I get asked by prospective customers, as you kind of have this digital transformation that we're going through. They say, well, why should I work with you? I already work with two of the other digital brokers. I said, well, maybe because we're stronger in different areas than they are. Just invite more competition into your network and see what happens. I'm not saying that you shouldn't work with competitors or not allow us in, because we just might be stronger in different areas or at different things. But, will there continue to go from 17,000 to 23,000, 28,000? Yeah, I kind of think maybe not. There could be some consolidation going on. But nothing like what happened with, airline, I don't think we're going to get down to, even fewer than thousands of brokerages, but I don't know, that's my start.
Yeah, I'll do as a second broker angle, but it's just, I think we'll compete on service and cost structure. If our cost structure is low and our service is high, it would be a really hard choice to go with another broker at some point. And I think we don't set ourselves apart necessarily just because we provide shipment tracking, for example. Shippers have come to expect that, and we'll expect that time and time again. So we'll have to the automation will drive our cost structure down, and the service will have to be top notch in order for us to continue to win business. But again, I agree with what he said. There's always going to be room for a broker to serve a niche, or a service provider to serve a niche really, really well, even with low automation. So
I'm going to answer it just a little differently. First, people still make decisions, and not every company takes care of a customer the same way. And that is, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. And I think the ones who do that, and it's a culture, even if it's, some people call it old school, that makes a difference, one. But I have this philosophy too, and I'm apolitical, that we're less of a capitalistic country than we are an entrepreneur country. And I think it's innovation. Like, who is going to figure out how to innovate best? And so you're 100% right in all your comments and all the buzzwords and everything. But when it gets down to it, who takes care of their customer, who's figures out how to be flexible and nimble without being custom, so it's this ornery thing you can't manage, and who's going to innovate in a way that has value versus innovating for a way that just was innovation, right? Those are my thoughts.
Well, we've gotten to 4:40, so it's very close to the originally targeted time. So it's time for maybe a couple of closing comments. So maybe some of the panelists who would like to offer their thoughts as to what's a glimmer in their eye as to what could be accomplished with supply chain visibility in the near future. We've already heard from Rob with this touchless shipment. Does any of the other panelists want to offer what is on the horizon for them, or just over the horizon, that they would like to, that they believe they would be talking about in the next year or so? Over here.
Well, I can give it a go.
Please.
So given that we play in the data platform and analytics space, we're seeing a convergence of the way operations are run and way analytics are done and way it's driving value in the enterprise. So there will probably be a focus on decision automation, because people are starting to be able to reach out and touch their data, integrate that in a way that you can understand it and make decisions near real time. I know it sounds a little buzzwordy, but there is a lot of pockets of innovation going on across the supply chain, from sourcing to manufacturing to transportation. And when you stitch it together, I think we will see some transformative aspects in the supply chain.
Yeah, I'm going to build on, just add to that, echo that. I think the big thing that needs to be conquered is the breaking down of functional silos, truly, because organizations still struggle with that. And I don't mean just from a technological standpoint, but true cross-functional operation. There's some organizations, and this is the point around innovation, right? When we talk about business disruption, some organizations have been able to do that better. But I still see a lot of opportunity for companies and technology to evolve to enable that. You know, given the way technology has evolved over time, and I think all of us are of an age where we've seen things much simpler and what's possible today, it's hard to fathom and answer the question of what's possible even 5 years from now, just because you know, we're doing things today we just wouldn't even have contemplated a short while ago. But certainly breaking those functional silos is where I think I'd like to see things happen.
Aside from the touchless load, my kind of hope over the next 5 years is that we can stop like wasting truck drivers' time. And I think we can use all of the data platforms at the facility, carrier, shipper level to try to understand where and why we waste drivers' time and make those drivers more productive, so that we don't have such a profound driver shortage.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on a different point here. It's going to be around talent. If you look around the world, there's only 4 countries that have the right population profile to be really positioned very well in the future. That's the US, Mexico, France, and New Zealand. And unless we can teach sheep, I don't think New Zealand's going to go anywhere. But that means that when companies are looking at nearshoring versus offshoring, we're going to see a lot more of maybe some of that assembly that's being done in China come to like Mexico. We need a lot more talent in North America. And so companies need to look at how do we attract talent all around, especially digital talent. And technology plays a big role into that. I hear it on almost every day. I think Fab and I are in organizations probably different from where we were before, where we're the old guys and the average age is below 30. And you see how they get motivated to come and work for a company. It has to be a different culture, but also technology is being used to attract and retain talent. If you go to a logistics company, you still have blue screens and green screens. good luck trying to hire young people, right? So position technology also in a way to really help your current talent, help make their jobs better, like AI, for example, will be able to automate some routines tasks. At the end of the day, it's not just about what you deliver, it's also how people interact on a daily basis in their jobs, make them happier so they want to stay. And at the same time have, for example, if you look at all these students, I remember 4 or 5 years ago, I was at a conference of autonomous vehicles. There was all these newer companies out there, but it was also the traditional car manufacturers there. There was a professor there from Stanford, and he said, I have all these students that are graduated, all of them have their top list of companies to work for. And then he turned to the audience and he talked to all these big car companies, the Fords and GMs, and he goes, and by the way, none of you are on that list. So it's very important how to use technology to position yourself for talent.
So I guess I would hopefully end on a happy note here. If I have predictions for the future, is that all of you are going to be in really high demand. You know, supply chains becoming just so much more important in, I mean, 10 years ago, there weren't even supply chain degree programs, and they're growing. And then we're starting to attract intelligent people like you to the industry. Technology is starting to attract people to the industry. So I think all of you are on a really great career track, and thank you for being interested in supply chain and helping to make it better.
Okay, with that, let's thank our panelists for a high energy presentation.
I just have one quick announcement. Thank you.